Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the local soccer show. Back-to-back weeks, guys. The in the month of April for you guys. We have an exciting show, guys, tonight. Fantastic guest, a wealth of knowledge. Backstage before coming on live, a real true personality. I'm very excited for this. It's gonna be fun, guys. We're taking you to another direction of course, grassroots soccer, and we're gonna touch a specific area where her expertise are going to be a wealth of knowledge that you can take for yourself or share with your friends. To share with your friends, guys, please, you know that the local soccer show, it comes to you via Milan Weekly podcast channel on YouTube. Guys, if you want this content, Milan content, the guys show up on Wednesday, coast to coast, Gio and Fabio, myself and Vinny on Monday nights, and of course, you get to see my beautiful face every second Thursday with the local soccer show. Guys, we have this content, but it's important. Like, subscribe to the channel, comment. It really helps us out with the YouTube's algorithms. And of course, we would not be able to start the show without thanking Evangelista Sports, guys. Check them out. They have fantastic gear from all over the soccer world. Boots, shin pads, accessories, Calcio gear, EPL gear, La Liga gear. They have it all, guys. It's a mecca here in Montreal for soccer. If you're here in Montreal, enjoy our Little Italy at 6821 Boulevard Saint Laurent, or check them out online at evangelistasports.com. They ship pretty much everywhere. The guys are really good with that. Without further ado, we have Dr. Tracy Vaillancourt with us this evening. But before that, Marcello, let's get us started, please. Tracy, welcome to the show. And please, I'm going to call you Tracy for the show. Please forgive me in advance. Do not shame me for not calling you doctor. I think it's just more personal if I call you Tracy, if that's okay with you.
That's perfectly fine with me.
Thank you. Tracy, thank you so much for being on with us tonight. It's going to be a lot of fun. Uh, you're a professor at the University of Ottawa, but I like to have the audience know who you are. How did you get involved with soccer? How did you start loving the sport? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I have always played soccer since I was really little. I grew up in a small town in British Columbia called Revelstoke. And when I became, I guess, a late teen, I played on the men's team because there wasn't a high level women's team there. And then I went to UBC and I did my degrees at UBC. Then I went over to Montreal and went to McGill and L'Université de Montréal as well. I played soccer in Montreal. I played varsity soccer, and I've played in women's prem here. I also played in Sweden for a little bit. So I've kind of played forever, and I coach as well.
Amazing. And how did you find that transition as a player, moving from player to coach to doctor? How did you?
So I've always been the type of person that the busier I am, the better I am. So instead of watching Netflix at night, I would coach or play. I coached even when I was in high school. So I coached like the U8 boys when I was in high school. And when I was in university, I also coached. So I coached boys in Vancouver as well. And I coached adolescent girls. And then I haven't stopped since. So now I'm coaching the provincial team. I've been coaching for Ontario for quite a few years. So I'm the head coach of the U17 provincial team. We're going to be playing Quebec pretty soon. And I was also part of the staff for Canada Games. I have been for the last two Canada Games. We beat Quebec, unfortunately, for you all in the finals of this Canada Games. And then I also coach Women's League One, and that's the highest division in Canada for women.
That's amazing. Tracy, and my next question would follow up is, I know you said you like to be better to be busy than to be bored, but you took it to another level. How did you navigate the time that it took for your studies, for what you for what you're doing now in your day to day, and all this coaching? How were you able to navigate that?
I think it wasn't always easy. It was particularly difficult when I had young children. So my daughters both play soccer, and I was coaching at a fairly high level in our province. So I found that was a bit difficult, and managing my job, which I think is quite demanding as well. Um, and I think that that's one of the issues with women staying as coaches. A lot of times when they have children, we lose coaches, and we lose them either forever, or they leave for about 10 to 15 years and then they come back to the game, which is speaks to the fact that we need to have a more inviting environment for women to coach when they have children. Um, I think that, it's interesting because the research shows that being an athlete and being physically active is really good for your brain. And I think that that kind of just helped me do my job, right? So there's a lot to be said about, I think there's a bit of a stereotype about dumb athletes, and yet it's not supported at all by the evidence. When I look at the grades of our D1 players, our women typically go down and play Division 1 in the United States. These are like all, the top of the distribution. They're getting 4.0s. They're excellent students. And who knows, are they excellent students because they're physically active and having to manage their time? Or is it the opposite, like they were already smart to begin with, kind of thing? We don't know the direction. But anyhow, I think the two go hand in hand is my point.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And for young coaches, or male or female, I think there's coaching and knowing the sport, or thinking that you know the sport, depending on where you're at. But for me, the sometimes I could give you my personal opinion. I'm not a teacher. I don't. I need to learn how to teach. Did you find it an advantage that you were in the teaching profession and also teaching while you were coaching?
I did actually. So when we think about player development, we have the four corner model. Ontario Soccer adopts it, but it's also Canada Soccer who uses it. And so the four corners are tactical, technical, then you have psychological, social, emotional, and then the physical component. So tactical, technical go together often. Sometimes things are a little, it's mélangé, but I would think I was stronger on social, emotional, and psychological than most coaches. And one of the things I notice a lot of times is that I was probably a little bit more generous with kids because I kind of understood what was going on earlier. So, for example, it's not my job to diagnose kids that come in, and nor did I, but I couldn't help notice what I noticed, right? Like
Yes.
I'm trained as a child clinical psychologist. I don't do that anymore. I just work as a professor. But if I saw a kid that the parents didn't tell me they had ADHD, I kind of knew already what was going on. And that gave, I think, me an advantage of not getting frustrated with that child, structuring the activities so that they were better included, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that. As a parent of a child that does have ADHD, I am by far not a doctor, but I can pick up the same cues and have little comparables with the different age groups or kids that I speak to and talk to. So uh, again, like you said, I'm never gonna diagnose them, but I try to change my approach with certain, and even what's very hard for me is I coach my own son, and I know that he has ADHD, and I know that what he's experiencing is very tough for him to digest, especially with the new CDC, where it's not focused on the team, it's focused on the talent and the technique that we want to build in these. So the group is much larger, so it's much more distracting for him. I had a question in regards to that. So, like, with your profession, and like you said, you're not going to diagnose anybody, but would the club or would the team that you would be coaching or with, would they listen to some of the recommendations that you would make, or would you make any recommendations if you knew that they would have to change a certain portion of the practice or the course?
So there's a little bit of, not little, there's a boundary, that you have to watch when you do what I do professionally, not as a soccer coach, where, we can't diagnose individuals that we're not seeing professionally. And so like, it's hard because you hold this knowledge and you kind of know what's going on. But then you can't sort of violate that professional standard, the ethics of that. So, but everybody knew what I did. So I could say things, and I think they kind of got the hint in a sense, like that, that it was coming from a good space. It was coming from a space where my intention was to have the kid be successful. And in other ways, like not even with kids who have struggles like ADHD. So I'll give you one example. So kids before the age of 7 have a really hard time with reversibility. And a lot of times we'll set up some activity in soccer and then we'll want them to do it backwards, like reverse the sequence. And I knew that that was a challenge developmentally. So I wouldn't get upset with myself thinking that I designed the session wrong. Like I wouldn't have designed it that way, but let's just say, whereas like a coach might beat them up and themselves up and say like, what was it? Why did I fail at this? Well, what they failed to understand was that developmentally kids aren't going to be able to do this. So I kind of didn't make those mistakes. But then I could also recognize if we were a little bit older and I was trying to do something that most kids should be able to do developmentally and they couldn't all do it, I would probably be quicker to adapt the session to accommodate everybody, because I kind of knew what was going on, because I know
it's an obvious edge, Tracy.
Yeah, I know developmental norms like the back of my hand. I've taught child development for 20 years. Like I know it so well. So those sorts of things help. And I do a lot of work with Canada Soccer and with Ontario Soccer. I'm a coach developer. And so I teach those sections too. If you ever take your youth license or your child license, you'll end up with me teaching you these things.
Well, I think I'm gonna. I'm sorry, Soccer Quebec there, but if I have to go to Ontario Soccer to take that my youth course, I'm signing up with Tracy, guaranteed, because she has the upper hand right now on everybody. Tracy, what's very interesting about that, and again, I would love to pick your brain about this because, like you said, this is your avenue, right? Myself growing up and the soccer that I was used to, and as a child growing up, is much different than, I'll take myself as the example of what my son is growing up with and going through right now. Coaching these kids, like we said, you are able to see certain things, right? And again, professionally not have an opinion about it, but you do see it. Mm-hmm. What can you tell us about the difference between a kid 30 years ago and a kid today? Like what is it? Electronics? Is it just life itself? What has changed so much that has put us completely in two different realms of growing up?
So if we're talking about just generally about child development, I can have a comment on that. If we're talking about what's changed in terms of how we coach young children, the evidence is less clear on that. So I would be using my anecdotal opinion, right? So just something that I've noticed over the years. So in terms of child development, generally speaking, things were very different for us than they are today. So we didn't have screens. Remember, we picked up the phone and called our friend, and you had to kick your sister off the phone to get it, like get on it,
or run to his house, knock and hope that someone answers.
We were kind of sent outside and then you came home for dinner. We had more mixed age groups, which is really good for scaffolding. So learning more advanced techniques as a soccer player, or trying to manage debates, that sort of thing is good when you have mixed age groups. I think the biggest thing though is we have kids now more organized than they ever were. So, you get on your bus, you go to school, you come home, this is going to be your next activity. Kids don't do things in the neighborhood like they used to. So these are not me saying what I've noticed. I've noticed these, but there's also research that supports what I'm saying.
Yes.
And then you can't ignore the elephant in the room. I mean, look at, we're using technology to have this conversation,
Yes.
and that has a huge effect on the developing brain of children. So it has an effect, especially on the teenage brain, and it's not a positive effect.
Another question for you, follow up to that one. And again, it's something that interests me a lot. We, as kids growing up, I don't really remember having, and you just said it now. You said organized. I'm going to use the routine word. Is it strange that I don't remember having a routine like the kids have right now? And my, because I didn't have a routine, well, anything really could have went. I was happy with everything. Nowadays, I find that even in a soccer practice, if things don't go or don't flow a certain routine that the kids are used to, you almost lose them. Like, they know they're gonna do a drill, and then they're waiting for that, the I call it the candy, the
Mhm.
scrimmage at the end of the practice. And if you take that away from them from the beginning, you almost lose them for the first two drills, and you have to start lying to them. Is that something that has changed too throughout time, or?
So we never had kids play sports year round. So that has definitely changed. We've, in a sense, professionalized sport for children, and that's problematic. It's problematic for a lot of reasons. So early specialization is not good for the developing body. You see more burnout, more injuries. Like, there's a lot of issues with that. When we were kids, you would probably play hockey in the winter and soccer in the summer, and baseball somewhere in between. And we played multiple sports. Like, I played every sport. When I was a kid, I saw an ad in the newspaper for a baseball team when I was 8, and I called the coach, and then I got on my bike and I showed up to the first practice. Like, my parents didn't even know I did any of this. And then I showed up, and he was surprised that I was a girl because it was a boys' team, but there was no girls' team. So
Yeah.
this is what I was going to do. Can you imagine what that would look like today?
I can't even imagine that
The parents
happening.
would be put in jail. And I had great parents.
Yeah, and even at that, I don't even. I have trouble. Not trouble. I think now, like, the things that I used to do as a kid, take get my bike and come almost where I'm living right now, where I lived with my parents and where I live now is a pretty healthy bike ride.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would trust my kids to do the same bike ride.
Well, and
That's the scary part.
how old's your son?
10.
Okay. So can you imagine your 10-year-old finding an ad on the computer, right? So wherever, on social media, then calling up the coach and getting on a bike and going out
No,
like
never.
never. And then I came home and I said, "Oh, you owe $15 for
Yeah,
this team for the summer," and they were like, "Okay."
yeah,
So like, and I know that's like, I'm using again like a personal experience, but
yeah,
that is also supported by research evidence. Like,
yeah.
that structure exists, and it didn't exist for us. And it's interesting because a long time ago, I was interviewed for a parent magazine, and I've been interviewed for parent magazines a lot in my days. And they were asking about a new study that came out, and it showed that this high structure of children's life actually wasn't too problematic for their development. And that was against what everybody thought was going to happen. Like, everybody thought this overstructuring was going to be problematic. And I said, okay, well, that's fine. Did you ask the moms how they feel? Because it's awful, right? As a parent, like, you're rushing to get home, and then you have to get them fed, and then you have to get them to their soccer practice. And the domes are expensive. So and when they're young, you don't get good times. So
Yeah.
you got to get them there at 6 p.m. and you got to drive across traffic, and everybody's stressed out, and they're running into the practice, and you don't want to screw it up for them because you think they have potential. And so, like, everybody's stressed out, well,
Yeah.
especially the parents. And so, and that was one of the issues. And then since then, studies have shown that, yes, like, this overstructuring has a little bit of an effect on kids, but has a really big effect on the health and wellness of parents.
Yeah.
And then,
And it,
and I'll just add this: if you're stressed out, your kids are stressed out. So eventually it's going to catch up, right?
100% agree. Again, luckily, I have the flexibility in my job to be able to coach and to be able to get him in on time. But if we would have had this conversation 2 years ago, pre-pandemic, Tracy, I don't know if I would be able to coach. I
Yeah.
would just not be able to make it on time. It would be impossible with travel and traffic. It would not be possible. Uh, that's just so that's a whole other. We can do a whole other show on that, and I would love to pick your brain on that. But one other thing, it's interesting. We talk about competition and whether we should have competition or not. So I'm not gonna, the American Academy of Pediatricians says you're not supposed to, like, the kid before 6 years old doesn't have the correct motor skills. So should we be promoting competition? Should we be avoiding it? What should we be doing? Because there's clubs that are offering soccer at 4 for U4, U5, right? So what's your take on that?
I do think that kids like competition. I mean, that's what makes it a game, right? And so I don't think there's anything wrong with competition. I just think it depends on what the competition is. So if it's a win at all cost at, let's say, U9. So when I first started coaching U9, so, I've coached every age group, but U9 at a big club, I felt a lot of pressure to win. And this wasn't that long ago. This was maybe about 15 years ago. And so, you look down your bench and you have a kid who's not as skilled as the others, and they're not getting the same minutes at 9, which is ridiculous. Like, when I think back at that time, I'm like embarrassed about what I've done. The nice thing is that, hindsight's 2020, and hopefully you learn from what you've done. So I don't think that when we have win at all costs, that's good for kids at all, because you can't help. But like, you're probably a competitive person, which is why you're doing what you're doing. I'm a competitive person. Like, I want to win. I love that feeling. But sometimes it puts pressure in a negative way. So that said, I do think that we want competition, but we don't want the wrong competition. I do agree, though, like 4-year-olds playing soccer. Have you ever seen 4-year-olds play soccer?
Yes,
It's a raisin clump.
my son has played. It's
You know what I mean? Like, when you take the raisins out of the box and they're all clumped together, that's
yeah,
what that U4 soccer looks like.
yeah,
There's the one ball and they all follow in a clump. And how's that development? You can play a lot of games, though, with them. A
yeah.
lot of things where, they go and get the ball in the middle and it's like a pirate ship, and you got to get your piece of gold and dribble it back to your ship. Like, there's so many cute little things you could do that would be competitive, but not a game where you have one ball and a clump of raisins.
Yeah, more kid friendly and kid
Exactly.
understanding, with dragons, and I'm all
Yeah.
for that.
And we call that developmentally appropriate.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it's not developmentally appropriate.
So you touched on something pretty important there. If we move on to the kids, 6 to 8 years old, and the U9s, right? Being super competitive. Myself, I would be lying to everybody on the show if I'm not super competitive. Uh, I am, but with the kids, I've tried and to talk to. I now I've met you, and I'm going to add you to the wonderful connections that I've made through the show. And some are coaches, some are health fitness guys. Now I add you to this as someone who I would love to pick their brain. Even though I'm competitive, Tracy, I take myself down to where I want to make sure that development is my number one
Mhm.
priority, not winning. And it's hard. I'm not going to say it's easy, but I think the club that you're at, and the atmosphere that you're at, needs to help a lot. Because if you're in an atmosphere where it's win, 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 well, you kind of start to suppress that development goal that you have for these kids, and it takes over with a win now, which would not be great at that age. At U9, Tracy, are we putting too much pressure on these kids for a win, 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 win type atmosphere?
We are, and it's not the time. And again, I've made these mistakes. So, I'm not here to say now, don't do, like, I am saying don't do it, but like, I could appreciate why it's done. And I've been guilty of it too. And it was part of the culture of what our province looked like 15 years ago, right? We had a competitive stream at U9, but we shouldn't be thinking about winning at all costs. We shouldn't be thinking about winning in that regard. We should be thinking about development, like you said, first. So really, is everybody getting a fair opportunity? Is everybody touching the ball? Is everybody progressing? And is everybody having fun? Do they want to come back? And I often present on this, like, again, I present this to our Canadian license holders for Canada Soccer. I present evidence of what happens when we focus on development over winning. What we do is we have more longstanding players, so players for life, but we also have kids that play at the highest level. So when you look at European leagues where they follow late maturing boys and early maturing boys, and they look at their likelihood of playing pro in Europe, it's the late maturing boys that tend to be overly represented in the pro league. And yet in North America, what we do is we pick those big, strong boys and girls, and we think, and why do we pick them? Because they're going to help us win at 9, but they're not going to be representing Canada at 25 for the most part, right?
No.
So we have to think about that. And the other thing too is that in Canada, we don't have pro academies for the most part. So parents are paying for this service, and their kids, it's our responsibility to develop their kids. They are customers. We're providing a service, and you better meet that. Can you imagine if you were a teacher in grade 3 and you said, you don't seem so good at math, so you go sit over there in the corner and work on coloring for the rest of the term while I work with the math stars over here. Like, can you imagine, like, that person would be fired. You'd be furious.
Yeah, and that's something that the CDC and the way we're putting together the practices now is addressing. I would ask you this to that, and again, I agree with you 100%. And let's say, and we'll talk straight up. What I've been seeing in the CDC is there's a mixture, right? There's a level of talent across that age group. We cannot hide that. Mm-hmm. That's what it is. The CDC wants this age group together. What happens is, if we're mixing them too much, is that there's two things that happen. The very, very talented kid will get mixed in with some not so talented kids, and the drill will not be beneficial to him because he will dominate that drill. And in doing so, will not make it fun for the kids that are less talented. What are your thoughts with? We'll start with mixing the talent in these types of drill, or should they be grouped in the pool of talent that they belong?
So it's a really tough question, because I do appreciate what you're saying, and I can see it from the viewpoint of the athlete. So here you have a really talented person who's not being challenged, and then you have other developing players who are overly challenged, in a sense, and their self-esteem's diminished because of it. They don't get as many touches on the ball. They're not maybe getting passed to. You know how it is with kids. They pass to their friends, or they pass to the kid they think is going to do the best.
They're a gang mentality, Tracy.
Exactly.
They become a gang mentality.
So if the extremes are too extreme, right, that we call that variance, that could be a problem. And it's about managing that. So you can, though, mix it successfully. So you can have some activities where they're together and they're learning from each other, because there's this thing called the zone of proximal development, and Vygotsky has coined this. We know this from education, but basically kids learn best from more able peers. Okay. So, but then that means, like, the top also needs to be challenged. So the more able peers here, but who are they learning from?
Who are they challenged from?
Yeah. So we have to provide opportunities for them. But if you can do it where you have, your big group together, and then you're putting some together here for this little bit, and then you're bringing them back together for another thing, and then you're separating them again. There is something to learn from peers that are not as skilled as you. It's funny because do you still play soccer? Are you still playing?
believe it or not, there, Tracy, I do. I still play
Okay.
soccer. Yeah,
Okay. So I find when I go up against women who haven't played their whole lives like I have, sometimes they're harder to defend
because they're
because
so
I can't
awkward.
predict what they're
Yeah,
going to do. It's
yeah,
true, right? Because it's unorthodox.
yes,
So, I mean, they're then being challenged in a way that's another tool in their toolbox. And it's not to say they're going to be then eventually, if they play at the highest level, high performance, they're going to be playing against unorthodox players, although they do exist. And so I don't think it's the end of the world for them to be with kids that aren't as skilled. Here's the challenge. I'll just say this, and if we're going to have this frank discussion, I think the challenge is that parents are in a rush to get to the top,
yeah,
and they're in a sense pushing their kids too early. And if parents were more patient, their coaches could be more patient. It's hard for us to be patient when we think there's going to be a mass exodus because we haven't challenged our top third, right? And if everybody could just calm down and understand that we have this developmental model that we know is going to work because there's evidence that it works, not just from what we think, but from scientific studies. If everybody could just calm down and just sort of trust the process, because eventually they will be competing at a higher level, and they will be grouped with higher achieving athletes.
yeah,
So, but you know how it is at U9. They all want their kids to play up. They do. Some of it is about bragging rights. Some of it is about, they want their child to be challenged, but they're missing the big picture. And I know I'm kind of hard, like I'm continuing on this and not giving you much chance to speak, but I just want to say that just because they're talented on that one quadrant of physical ability
yes,
doesn't mean their social emotional score is great. So what if you're pushing a kid who now gets bullied because they're the little kid on the team?
yeah,
They're playing up and none of the other boys want to accept them, or the girls, or they're never past the ball at the next level because, again, they're seen as the young kid, or there's jealousy. Like, it's complicated. It's not just about what their skill set is today. Does that make sense?
yeah. Don't worry about talking
Well, it's your
and
show.
not
I
letting
don't
me
want to
talk.
be
No, no,
like,
no, 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 no. I and on Milan Weekly podcast, which is what we do on Monday nights, Tracy, I never shut up. I'm always
okay.
talking. So when I'm on the local soccer show, the guest is the one who's going to be doing all the talking. I need to just absorb all this because it's interesting for me. And my next question was, when are you in Montreal? Because I would love to put you in front of all the parents and all the coaches and all the board members of my club so you could have this exact same conversation with them so that we could pass this message on. Because as a volunteer coach, like I said, I see myself again. I'm not perfect here,
Yeah.
but I have that developmental goal in mind for the kids that I coach. It's hard when everybody's not on the same page. It's really hard because I'm trying to do something and they're trying to go to, let's say, the next level, but that next level is not receptive to what I'm trying to do. That's what becomes hard with that. How would you deal with a situation like that?
So it's difficult because your club, so your team is nested within a club culture. That club culture is then nested within a city culture, which then is nested within a provincial culture, which is then nested within our Canadian culture. And so we have to get all of those layers right. So let's just say you have a developmental model in a club that doesn't, that they want to win, they want their trophy case just lined.
Yeah,
They want
full.
all the, and I'm going to just concentrate on boys because I know you coach boys, but obviously the same could be said for girls.
Yeah,
All the boys want to come over because they're lining up and they're winning everything and they're smashing all the competition in their region. I don't know how that you develop when you have no competition, but
yeah,
that aside, then it's not a good fit because you have a team and a viewpoint that doesn't fit the larger culture. So now let's just say you have your team in a culture in a club that matches. Excellent. So everywhere the parents turn, the coaches are on the same page. That we're all talking the same language. But your next door neighbor's club has a win at all cost mentality, and they are having some success early and smashing everybody. And now parents are like, oh, I got to be there. My kid's never going to make it. Yeah. So it can't just be you, and it can't just be your club. It has to be everybody in Quebec. Does that make sense?
Well,
and then
100%.
When they come to Ontario to play us, we also have to have very similar viewpoints and principles. And that doesn't happen enough. And that's why Canada Soccer has revamped the way they do their children's license, their youth license, their B license, their A license. Ontario Soccer has revamped everything. This is why, remember when we took away no standings for youth soccer? Like, the parents lost their mind.
Yeah.
Hockey then got all of the parents who liked that idea and then went over there. So it took a little bit of an uncomfortable few years, and now we've got that under control. So we just got to keep at it, and we'll get it right.
Yeah. No, and it's important. It's funny that you say that too. Taking away the standings was just something that we not easily available, but the kids know where they are. The kids know what the scores. They know by themselves. So they just became the scoreboard for everybody. So, I want to introduce a topic that you mentioned before. You said you showed up at the baseball park. You were a little girl and wanted to play baseball. There was no girls baseball team, so they had to make you play with the boys. Now, I want to pick your brain, on the soccer level side, because just the inscription is just exploded for both boys and girls. Where do you stand on, on mixing boys and girls? And is there a specific age where we should or should not mix them?
So I think it's fine when they're U8 and below. But I think once they get past that, it's really hard. And I see a lot of girls train with boys. I've seen that, and I've seen them be successful. But I've also seen a lot of girls who don't get the ball when they should get the ball. I see a lot of girls who get bypassed. Like, I used to play mixed soccer with my husband, but we would control the type of men that were on our team in a sense. And that sounds a bit like I don't know, like manipulative in a sense, but it's just because like the women on our team, we didn't want men who were going to bypass us. We wanted to play as a team.
Yes.
But it took a lot of effort. I see that all the time, and it breaks my heart. And I just think, like, what makes you a good player? So just think about this from like the individual level, like at that child's perspective. So the way you get better is by getting on the ball, by having confidence on the ball. And confidence means that you're going to try things that you wouldn't normally do, right? You're going to try a pass with the outside of your foot. You're going to take a shot on your weak foot instead of transferring it over to your dominant foot. You're going to make all of these different decisions and actions in a game because you have confidence. So now you're the girl on a boys team, U12, and they're not passing it to you, but then you finally get the ball passed to you, or it's a fluke, it comes to you. What decisions are you going to do, and what actions are you going to do? You're going to play safe.
Yeah, the ones that make me most comfortable to make the best play. So
exactly.
No attention's drawn to me.
Exactly, because you're so salient, you're so obvious. So I think what that does then is that it makes girls be really good at making safe decisions. Now, the benefit to playing with boys is the speed of the game is a lot higher, and it looks very different. We have a lot of girls that don't dribble in Canada, and boys, they just don't pass.
Yeah, they don't pass. Yeah.
Like, as soon as they get the
ball, we'd have to
like,
merge them together. We'd try to merge these people together.
Exactly. Like, I see little boys playing, and they're like, I'm not passing this ball. I finally got it. And, like, it's funny because it's like all this 1v1 on the boys. Like, and of course, we're talking grassroots stuff, right?
Yes.
With girls, it's all pass, pass. And you can hear them saying it, pass, pass, pass. And then parents complaining if they dribble too much.
Yeah.
So for some, like, I'm not saying it's like all bad, but I just think, like, think about that. If your daughter's playing with boys, is she getting the ball? Does she have confidence? Is she doing the unexpected? Because if she's doing all of those at that speed of game, she's going to be okay. But most of them are going to answer no to one or all of those things that I just said.
Sticking with that topic, it's a topic that came up with a friend of mine that coaches in a little bit north of Montreal. Uh, we talked about boys being playing one level up. What about girls playing one level up or two level up sometime?
So
What are your thoughts on that?
So again, now we have to think about that social emotional quadrant. Like, so playing up is good for kids who need to be challenged, but I don't think they should permanently play up. I think that the model would be, let's just say I have a U10, a very talented U10 girl, where she sometimes plays with the U11 girls. And the reason being is that her peer group is the U10 girls, right? And like, so we don't want them to then be 2 years up, 3 years up, and then they're socially isolated and they don't have a peer group. In Ontario with League One, we have a rule about what age they can play League One at. And I help write the rule from a developmental point of view. What I didn't want, and it wasn't just my decision, but it was very well informed. If you read the policy, you'll see all the references for every point that was made. So is it appropriate for a 14-year-old girl to be on a bus with a bunch of women who are talking about their hangover? Like, those things are not good. That's not what she be doing. So we're going to have to find a place for that 14-year-old talented girl, but it can't be there. Not because the soccer isn't good for them, but because the context, the peer context isn't good for them.
Yeah, exactly that. They're just, even though they're, and we'll even put them even just at 18.
Yeah.
There's such a big difference between 18 and 14, especially with girls.
Exactly.
And again, it's not to be sexist or anything, but 14-year-old boy and 18-year-old boy, the boy kind of comes down to the 14-year-old mentality, right? But I think on the women's side, I think it's like the women will stay at the 18-year-old mentality, and that 14-year-old is just put in a very uncomfortable place. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I would see. I remember myself as 14, right? I would have no problem having a conversation with my cousins and their friends that were 5 years older than me. They would almost bring their level down, and not even maliciously, but not even think about that. But like, we would play a sport. Is it different for women? Am I completely off?
It is. And there's a lot of research to support that. It's not sexist to say it. So girls value and women value inclusion more than boys and men. And boys and men tend to organize themselves hierarchically. So with girls groups, and I've said this a million times, and I actually have a book coming out on this next year.
Yes. Plug the book, Tracy. Plug the book.
So, and basically what we see is that boys, because they're hierarchically organized, like if you're that little squirt 14, they're going to put you in your place real quickly, right? You're going to know who you are and where you stand, and you're going to get ripped like you wouldn't believe. Women knock down the tall poppy, and so do girls. So I always teach this on the youth licenses and the children's license. Like, so who's most likely to be bullied on a boys team? Who do you think?
On a boys team, I would be guessing if maybe the one who's the least talkative.
How about the least skilled?
That's true.
Yeah. Right? So boys don't have tolerance for that, whereas girls have no tolerance for the best player, and they knock them down. So like, they're already vulnerable, and then you put them up in age, and it makes them, so those older players are going to eat that player alive.
Yeah.
And it's going to take a really skilled coach to manage that. And a lot of times we don't see it. So like, I'm telling men who coach women and girls to be mindful of that, right? So we will highlight the best player. We do that a lot. And but when you do that in girls' teams and women's teams, you're actually setting them up for failure. And I have tons of friends who played on Canada's women's national team who can come onto your show and tell you stories about how that is.
Yeah.
You could read Carly Lloyd's autobiography, and you'll find that in her autobiography that they knock down the tall poppy. Whereas boys, if you're the best boy on the team,
You're the alpha.
you can get away with like a lot, right? We talked about Zlatan before the show, like
Yeah.
talk about that kind of ego. I mean, really talented men and boys can get away with murder. Really talented girls and women have to pretend they're less. And that's really unfortunate.
Is this again? Is this why we see tons of girls are playing soccer? It's amazing to see them all registering and playing youth soccer, but we see them leave the sport at an earlier age than boys. Is this something that
It's a huge
contributes to that?
issue. Exactly. So we have a huge exodus of women from sport in general, but particularly around age 14, 15. And a lot of reasons, like some of the reasons is because of the way they feel about their teammates and how their teammates make them feel. A lot of times it's also the coach not appreciating these differences. Like we're kind of at this point where we're not supposed to say gender or sex differences exist, but
Yeah.
they absolutely exist, right? So not appreciating, you have to coach girls differently than you coach boys. I'm not saying that your step over take is different.
Yeah.
I'm not saying the principles of striking a ball are different. I'm talking about how you manage the group is going to be different, right? That those reasons are huge in why girls leave soccer.
Yeah. We touched on it a bit there, but CDC right now we're at a point where we're again quadrant style training. We're training teams in groups and the full category of groups, the full age group, no matter the talent skill, we're training together, both women and men. Because we're doing this, do you think we're losing that group dynamic, that team bonding experience? Do you think is that contributing to kids not being on the same page all the time, or being a little bit sporadic when it comes to team sport?
It's a good question. I'd have to kind of see how it's being delivered. I think if the groups are too big, then you don't get a lot of unity for sure. So I'd have to see what it looks like. I haven't seen any evidence of one way or the other. So when I read studies for a living, right? So I haven't seen anything on that. But I can imagine if the group's too big, then you don't feel like you belong, right?
The group is too. The groups again. I can speak what I've seen.
Yeah.
I think the groups are too big, and I think the groups get changed every week. So you're not with the same people every week, but you will see your teammates every week if you have a game. So
Mm-hmm.
that's where and then you throw in the other variables where there's some kids that go to school together. There's some
Yeah.
kids that go to different schools. There's some kids that they go to a completely different school. Ethnic differences, background differences. When we were playing sport, you played with that team. You kind of grew up with that team, and
You
that team
did.
became a family.
Yeah.
Now, am I saying that's perfect? Absolutely not. When the family would never break, they would never want anybody to come inside. That's again a bit of or age. I'm aging myself. I don't want to age you, please. I don't want you to hate me. But that family would never break. Now that bond, it's kind of hard, Tracy. I see it. It's not the same type of bond, and it's because I think we're at practice time where they spend almost the most time together. It's not necessarily always together.
Have they ever asked the kids how they feel about this? Because that would be my guess that needs to be
You know
done.
what, Tracy? You're the first person who's ever asked that question. I don't think anybody's asked the kids how they feel about that.
I think they
I,
need to
as a
be asked. Yeah.
just to add to that, before you give your professional opinion, for me, I get it because I hear it. I coach a kid on the team. It's my son,
Mm-hmm.
and what my son keeps on telling me is like, "Daddy, I'm not interested in this today." And I ask why, Gianfranco. And he says, "Well, I'm not sure I'm going to be with all my teammates this time. It depends how they split the groups." And you see them when they're splitting the groups, Tracy. They're like they're like armies. They're army ants. They know where they want to go, and it's not necessarily because of those variables. It's not necessarily always with their teammates. Now, my son has a it takes from his father at least this good quality where he really gets along with a lot of. He's very easy to get along with. But I put myself in the shoes of a kid who doesn't have that quality. That's a tough week in week out. That's a tough time to practice.
That was the kid I was thinking of too. So we're on the same page. I was thinking about the kid who's more socially anxious, who's shy, more socially withdrawn. Um, that kid's going to have, I don't know if we're going to keep those kids because predictability is what they like. Predictability makes people feel safe, especially anxious kids. It's not like we want to make their lives completely predictable because that's actually terrible for anxiety as well. But a bit of predictability is really good for kids. And so we've kind of taken that away, it seems like. So I think that there's going to be a certain personality that can manage that, but you're going to have about 30% of kids when we look at the percentage of introverts, shy kids who are going to have a really hard time with that. So maybe the thing is to go back and ask the kids what they like.
Yeah. And again, if we bump them up again, group dynamic. As we get up in the age, there's tryouts now. Where we get to a point where there's tryouts, and being cut from a team is not hard to. It's hard to take for the kid. What can you tell us about the importance of those relationships within a team? And how vital is that emotional component between the players when someone does get cut, now that we're getting to that 17-year-old age, right? Because it's
It's
gonna
tough.
hurt. Yeah.
It really, and we do it even earlier than 17, right? So it's interesting because back when I said like 15 years ago, we cut 9-year-olds.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? So one of the things I think we don't appreciate enough is that, and you kind of hit on it again. I think you're like a child psychologist in your other life.
Well, no.
Is that it is a family for them. And so you're not only cutting the kid, you're cutting the family away from their social group because you spend so much time together when your kids are playing competitive sports that there's that component too. So I think that we underappreciate how this is perceived by not only the individual, but their family. And remember, we talked about your team being nested within your club's team, within your club, within your city. So, I think this is where we need really skilled parents coming in and reframing it for kids. And we need coaches to be really skilled in reframing it. I think parents need to always keep in mind and always tell their kids this. And the coaches need to also be saying this to kids if they're cutting them, that the best place for a kid is where they're appreciated, where they get on the ball a lot, where they're dominating, where they're the top kid. So I would rather have my kid play the next tier down and feel good about themselves than sitting on the end of a bench, getting very few minutes and playing on the top team, because they're really not playing on the top team. Yeah. They will not get better on the bench. And so if we can reframe this, and then they understand that going down and playing at the level you should will make you better so that you could come
back up. Yeah. One last question when it comes to that, and again, it's something that that has always intrigued me. I don't do this with my son, and I stand by it. I said I would never do it. But let's go. I'm gonna take Tracy, the child psychologist, and I'll need you to be like an adult psychologist now. Are parents trying to live their dream through their kids?
Some are. Some absolutely are. A lot of them, in a sense, think that this is what their kids want, but the kids don't want this much pressure. So we should be asking the kids what they want, and we should make it really clear that this is about them. My daughters played high performance at like my oldest daughter played nationally on her youth national team for Sweden. And wow. And I always made it clear, this is your life. This is your dream. You don't have to do anything you don't want to. A lot of people perceive that because I'm a soccer person that I must have pushed her in. Her dad's a soccer player too, but never. I think it's really important that we make that clear, that we don't want kids' identity to be as a soccer player, because then if they get injured, then they're going to be depressed, that sort of thing. Anyhow, so to your point, this is complicated, right?
Yeah. It's a very, I don't want to say walking on eggshells topic. It's like you want to try to say something, but you don't want to overstep. Kind of like from parent to parent, it's kind of like, well, you can parent. I'm not gonna judge you on how you want to parent. You're gonna parent like that, right? So,
I think that what parents need to do is just cool their jets. Just let their kids play and enjoy watching them play. When they get in the car, the first thing you should say is, "Did you have fun?"
yeah,
Or "What was the snack?" Like, just don't focus on how come they didn't pass you the ball. Why didn't you shoot when
yeah,
I yelled
shoot,
at you?
shoot.
That sort of thing. And then I think they'll be in a better position. I think the other thing too is to stop making social comparisons.
Yeah,
Your son or your daughter is going to get to where they need to get to, but you got to be patient.
yeah,
The best way to have them not achieve their goals is to push them out the door, and you push them out of soccer by putting too much pressure on them.
yeah. Volunteer coaches is my last topic for you
Okay.
because I'm a volunteer coach. And some clubs, and I've seen bylaws and policies from different clubs. Some clubs, encourage their parents to coach, especially if they have a child on the team, either whether they have a child on the team or not. Some clubs won't let you or forbid you from coaching your significant child or the son or daughter after the age of 13 years old. What are your thoughts on that? Because the way I see it, if the dad or the mom is doing a fantastic job with the team, why are we going to stop them at 13 years old? What's the magic of 13?
I don't know about the magic of 13, but I don't think parents should be coaching their kids during that developmental period. I think if they're in a higher performance stream, we shouldn't be coaching our kids. And I'll tell you why. You can manage it now. Your son's 10. I think that that's reasonable, but it's going to work against him in the future, because what you're going to do is you're going to change your behavior to avoid bias. So, and the way you're going to do it is twofold, or one of two ways. You're either going to overcompensate, where somebody needs to get fewer minutes, and it's going to be your son always. So, because you don't want anybody to complain. So he's always going to get the short end of the stick. So that's either going to happen, or you're going to have a bias that you don't even are acknowledging, and you actually are giving him a little bit more than he deserves.
Yeah.
And then the teammates are going to resent him. The parents are going to resent them. Don't forget that kid gets in the other team. Your son's teammates get in the car, and the parents say, "Did you see Coach Stevie picked his son again? Oh, did you see, that sort of thing." So I think it's probably best if you don't. When he's an adult again, like, pick it up again, coach him again.
Oh, nice.
Then it's different.
Yeah.
But I think when they're that age, I wouldn't coach my daughters.
Amazing. Thank you, Tracy. I will take that advice, guaranteed.
Yeah.
Tracy, I want to pick your brain about a future women's league. What Canada and Quebec are doing for women's soccer. Tell us a little bit about what you would like to see Canada continue to do or do better, and the provinces what they continue to do or what they can do better.
So I love that you said we have tons of girls registering, because we lost a lot during the pandemic. So what we need to do is keep girls in soccer, right? So it's really hard to be competitive if we don't have a large base. So we need to rethink how we coach girls so that we keep them for as many as we can for as long as we can. And ideally, they're going to be, old like you and me and still playing soccer, right? So, and you got to admit, it's fun and you love it still.
Yeah.
So, but in terms of the professional part of it, so we need a larger base of players. And then we also need to prioritize women's soccer at a high level. So in Ontario, we have League One. You have an equivalent to Quebec. BC now has one. This is really good for women's soccer, but it's not professional like on the men's side, right? Like, they're not getting paid to do this. Sometimes they're still paying fees to play League One. They shouldn't be, but sometimes that happens. So that'll be really important. And then we obviously need a professional league for women. I mean, that's a given.
Yeah, that's a big need especially
It
with
really
how
is.
successful the women's national team has been and what they've done for the country and for girls, and even boys. Tracy, let's some boy. I watch their games as well, and you know what? You feel proud to be Canadian, and you feel like playing soccer when you watch them, and when you
Yeah.
watch them do well. So they've
Yeah.
done well for the country. So I think the country should be giving back.
So I have the privilege of coaching our best in Ontario, and 60% of the women's national team comes from Ontario. Sometimes it's as much as 70%. All of the players that I have coached that are now on the senior women's team, they all play abroad.
Yeah, and not in a domestic league because we don't have one.
We don't have one, but they're also not playing even in the United States.
Yeah,
So, I mean, the opportunities don't really exist in our backyard, and that's really unfortunate. Of
yeah,
course, there's a few that are, but they're far and few between. I would love to see them home
yes, home.
if they want to be. Like, obviously,
Of
I'm not
course,
going to,
yes. We're not gonna. We're Tracy and Steve go to
yeah.
Europe to collect all the
Can you
national team
imagine?
players. You're coming home.
Yeah.
Tracy said you need to come home. So yeah, for sure. Uh, Tracy, I want to thank you so much. An hour flew by, and I love these ones because we could stretch the realm of local and grassroots soccer, and of course with your expertise and and your great advice, I hope people will listen to the local soccer show, share it with their friends, and continue to spread this wealth of knowledge that we try to bring to everybody on the local soccer show. But before I let you go, there's some burning questions that I need to ask you. They're like rapid fire
All
questions,
right.
very, very short answers, very fun. So, obviously, you see behind me, and everybody who watches the show, I'm a hardcore Milanista fan. Uh, do you follow a particular league? And if you do, what is your favorite team in that league?
So, for the women, I follow Chelsea women. And we have two great Canadians that typically start on that team. So, of course, I'm going to go with Chelsea. And then for men, it's really tough because back in the day, I was a Barcelona fan, true, and and then I always have been a Liverpool fan as well. I'm less of a Barcelona fan now. I'm still a diehard Liverpool fan. But it's interesting because we talked about this before the show. Sometimes people think I like Liverpool because they've been doing well in recent years. But I loved them when they stank it up. I need you to know. I've always loved them.
Yeah, well, that's good. Tracy, you're a professor at the University of Ottawa, so I would imagine you said Ottawa, Montreal. I'm in Montreal. You're in Ottawa. Where is the food better, in Montreal or in Ottawa?
So I lived in Montreal, and I'll say the bagels are better in Montreal. I don't want Kettleman's Bagels to get after me. They're pretty good though. They're pretty close. I think that there's more variety in Montreal. I'm gonna have to go with Montreal on that one. Sorry,
Nice.
Ottawa.
If you can go back and the players that you coached, and you've been very successful and continue to be successful with the Ontario provincial team. But is there a coach that that you can look back and you say he or she really pushed me or guided me or was a role model to what I'm doing now?
It's interesting because I had Annie Caron coach me for a year, and she was on our women's national team, and she's in from Montreal. And it was the first time I had a woman coach me, and the experience was so important and so salient. So I think she kind of remembers me. We were on LinkedIn together, but her influence on me was enormous.
Amazing. You see, you pointed me out right away. You said that I have a very European and Italian accent, so I'm gonna ask you your favorite pizza or pasta.
Pasta.
Pasta, good. That's my follow-up question, and I promise it's the last question. Pasta is very important to our whole community, and it's a very important question for the guest on this show because I end the podcast with this. Tracy, you come home from a long day at work, on the field, you get home. You're going to have a plate of pasta. And the plate of pasta will be penne. Do you know what a penne is?
Of course I do.
Yes. So if you have to choose penne lisce or penne rigate, with the lines or without the lines?
Without.
Without the lines, Tracy.
I know the sauce doesn't get stuck
Yeah.
in them, right? I know. And the cheese doesn't get stuck. It all slips off. So can I take back my answer?
You can,
I
because
need
the
the
right
lines.
penne with the line. So it's penne rigate, the right answer.
There you
Tracy, I
have
want to
it.
thank you so much for your time. It's been great fun. We would love to have you on again, especially if we get we get this league, and the women's soccer. We can start going and get back those national team players that you coached. I'll come with you to bring them back home. Thank you so much, Tracy, for your time.
Thank you. And thanks for the great questions. I really enjoyed my time.
Marcello.